The restaurant was alive with the sounds of chatter, laughter, and the clinking of cutlery. It was one of those evenings where everything seemed to sparkle. Soft lights bounced off the polished tables. Waiters moved gracefully between guests, and the faint aroma of fresh coffee mixed with the sweet scent of desserts. In the corner of the room, a grand piano stood, untouched for most of the evening. Many people admired it, but no one had yet dared to play it. Among the crowd was a businessman, someone used to the finer things in life. He had been to countless events, dined in the best restaurants, and seen performers of all kinds. To him, it was hard to be impressed. He watched the room with a quiet confidence, taking small sips of his drink, scanning the guests around him. His eyes, sharp and observant, landed on a woman who was quietly clearing plates nearby. She was simple in appearance, dressed in a modest uniform, moving with a calm, unobtrusive rhythm. Nothing about her suggested that she was someone extraordinary. To him, she looked like any other staff member, someone who worked hard but would never step into the spotlight. As he continued to observe, he whispered to his companion, a faint smirk forming on his face. "She's just another nobody. Nothing special here." His words were meant to be casual, but they carried a hint of judgment, a subtle way of expressing how easy it was for him to underestimate someone by how they looked. Around them, guests continued their conversations, oblivious to the small moment of dismissal. Meanwhile, the woman carried on with her work, completely unaware of the businessman's words. She had been serving in this restaurant for several years, and over time she had grown used to people judging her at first glance. Many assumed that because she worked as a server, she had no other skills, no hidden talents, no stories that mattered. Most of the time, she didn't mind. She liked the quiet of her work and the way she could move through the room without drawing attention. But deep inside, she carried a passion that very few had ever seen, a passion that had been nurtured for years in small, private moments. That evening, as she moved gracefully from table to table, she didn't notice the curious glances she occasionally received. Some guests looked at her with mild interest, some with polite indifference, and others, like the businessman, with quiet judgment. But she had long learned not to let the opinions of others affect her. She focused instead on doing her job well, ensuring that every guest felt attended to, every table looked perfect, and every dish reached the table just at the right time. The restaurant hummed with life. Yet there was a certain tension in the air that night. It wasn't visible and it wasn't loud, but it was there, a small expectation that something unusual might happen. The grand piano in the corner seemed to wait silently, almost as if it knew that soon it would be played. But for now it stood still, polished and proud. While the evening carried on as usual, the businessman's gaze lingered on the woman a little longer. He had seen many people in his life, and yet he thought he had learned to recognize talent at a glance. To him, there was nothing remarkable about her. He had made his decision quietly, unconsciously placing her in a category of ordinary and moving on with his thoughts. He didn't know it yet, but this assumption was about to be challenged in a way he could never have imagined. As the night progressed, the laughter and conversations flowed seamlessly. Guests sipped their drinks, enjoyed their desserts, and occasionally glanced at the piano, wondering who might play it. But no one moved. The woman continued her work, quietly attentive, unnoticed by most. She carried herself with a grace that went beyond appearance, but at this moment, it was invisible to everyone around her. Little did anyone know, the quiet woman moving through the restaurant that evening was about to do something that would stop the chatter, silence the room, and make even the most skeptical observers pause in awe. She was about to step into a moment that would change the way people saw her and challenge the assumptions that everyone, including the businessman, had made. The evening continued, the restaurant alive with its usual mix of conversation, laughter, and the occasional clinking of glasses. The grand piano still sat silently in the corner, polished and waiting. Guests occasionally glanced at it, some curious, some thinking it was just a decoration, and some wondering if anyone would ever play it. The businessman, still seated comfortably at his table, kept an eye on the woman. He had already judged her as ordinary, yet there was something about her calm, quiet confidence that caught his attention. He didn't understand it at first. He was used to people who tried too hard to impress. She didn't try. She simply moved with purpose, clearing tables, refilling drinks, and offering polite smiles to the guests. That kind of composure was rare, and though he would not admit it yet, it made him curious. At one point, in a playful, joking tone, he turned to his friends and said, "I wonder if anyone here can even play that piano. Probably just another decoration, right?" Laughter followed, casual and light, as everyone assumed it was impossible that a server could be a skilled musician. Then, still half in jest, he looked toward the woman who had been moving quietly among the tables and added, "Maybe you? Can you even play?" The words were meant as a joke, a tease. Everyone in his group expected her to blush, shake her head, or give a polite, embarrassed smile. Perhaps she would mumble something like, "I'm not a musician," and quietly walk away. It seemed like a harmless moment of fun, but the woman simply paused, looked toward the piano, and nodded ever so slightly. There was no hesitation, no nervous glance, just a calm acceptance, as if she had been waiting for this moment all her life. The room seemed to pause for a moment. Some guests looked on curiously, others with amusement, thinking it was just a part of the joke. But something about her demeanor suggested that this was not a joke. She moved toward the piano with steady, confident steps. The businessman watched, his smirk fading slowly. There was a subtle shift in the energy of the room. It was no longer just a regular evening at the restaurant. Something unexpected was about to happen. As she reached the piano, she gently lifted the cover and placed her hands on the keys. There was a silence, almost as if the restaurant collectively held its breath. Her posture was relaxed but precise. She didn't announce herself, didn't ask for attention, she simply prepared to play. The businessman leaned forward slightly, his curiosity now mixed with a twinge of unease. He had expected nothing, and yet he felt a growing sense that he might be about to witness something extraordinary. The first note sounded, soft but perfectly clear. It was a delicate tone that seemed to fill the air in a way no ordinary playing could. Guests stopped mid-conversation, some setting down their glasses, all turning their attention toward the piano. It was as if the music had drawn a line through the room, separating ordinary noise from something special. Even the businessman, who had never been easily impressed, felt a knot of disbelief form in his chest. The notes continued, gentle at first but gradually growing in richness and depth. It was not just skill, it was expression. Each movement of her fingers told a story. Each chord carried emotion that words could not convey. The room, which had been alive with chatter just moments before, fell completely silent. Every guest, every staff member, every observer was drawn to the performance, captivated by the unexpected talent unfolding before their eyes. People began to exchange surprised glances. "Is she really playing that well?" someone whispered. Another guest nodded slowly, eyes wide. The atmosphere shifted from casual amusement to quiet awe. The businessman, sitting at his table, could not look away. His earlier judgment, his belief that she was just a nobody, crashed down in a wave of astonishment. How could someone who seemed so ordinary create such beautiful, moving music? It wasn't flashy or showy. There were no exaggerated gestures, no dramatic flourishes meant to attract attention. It was pure, honest talent. Every note seemed carefully chosen, every pause perfectly timed. The music seemed to reach into the hearts of the listeners, evoking memories, emotions, and feelings they hadn't expected to experience in a restaurant on an ordinary evening. The businessman found himself leaning back, stunned. He realized that he had underestimated her completely. He had judged her by appearance, by position, by the simplest assumptions. And now, as her hands moved gracefully over the keys, he was confronted with the truth. Talent cannot be measured by looks, and greatness can come from the most unexpected places. The woman played with a quiet confidence that was impossible to ignore. Some guests wiped tears from their eyes, others simply sat frozen, unable to move. Even the staff, who were used to seeing performers come and go, watched with wide-eyed admiration. It was clear that this was no ordinary performance. This was a moment of genuine magic, the kind that doesn't happen often. And everyone present knew they were witnessing something rare. As the final notes of her piece lingered in the air, the silence hung for a brief, powerful moment. Then, slowly, the restaurant erupted in applause. Guests stood, some clapping vigorously, some cheering softly, all moved by what they had just experienced. The businessman, once skeptical and amused, now sat in speechless admiration. He realized that, in his attempt to judge her, he had been completely wrong. The woman who had seemed ordinary, invisible even, had just silenced a room full of people with her extraordinary talent. The applause continued, but the woman remained composed. She didn't smile widely or bow dramatically. She simply returned to her seat, calm and collected, as if what had just happened was normal. But to everyone else, it was far from normal. It was a revelation, a lesson in humility, and a reminder that true talent often hides in the most unexpected places. The applause grew louder with each passing second. What started as a hesitant clap from a few guests soon turned into the whole room standing on their feet. People clapped with genuine emotion, not out of politeness, but because they truly felt moved. Some smiled through watery eyes. Others shook their heads slowly, still trying to understand how such powerful music had come from someone they had barely noticed before. The woman stood quietly near the piano, her hands resting at her sides. She did not bow deeply or make a grand display. She simply gave a small, polite nod, the kind anyone might give after doing something ordinary. But this moment was anything but ordinary. The sound of the applause filled the room like a wave, washing over everyone. Including the businessman who had once laughed at the idea of her playing. He stood up slowly from his seat, still clapping but with a very different feeling in his heart. Just a short while ago, he had looked at her and seen nothing special. Now he felt something else: respect. Real, honest respect. His mind replayed his earlier words again and again. Just another nobody. The words felt heavy now, filled with regret. As the applause slowly faded, the restaurant buzzed with quiet excitement. People leaned toward each other, whispering in amazement. Where did she learn that? One guest asked, "Why is she working here?" Another wondered. Some even pulled out their phones, wishing they had recorded the moment. But many were glad they hadn't. It felt too personal, too special to reduce to a screen. The woman stepped away from the piano and returned to her duties like nothing had happened. She began clearing empty glasses and plates again, her calm routine unchanged. But now, every movement she made was noticed. People looked at her differently. There was curiosity in their eyes, respect. Some guests offered quiet smiles as she passed. Others simply watched in silence, still processing what they had witnessed. The businessman remained standing for a moment longer than everyone else. His friends looked at him, waiting for one of his usual confident remarks. But none came. Instead, he slowly sat back down, thoughtful and quiet. For the first time in a long while, he did not feel like the most important person in the room. And strangely, instead of feeling uncomfortable, he felt humbled. A few minutes later, when the woman approached his table to clear some dishes, the atmosphere felt different. Earlier he had spoken to her lightly, almost playfully, as if she were part of the furniture. Now he looked at her with seriousness and care. When she reached for a glass, he gently stopped her. "I want to say something," he said, keeping his voice low and respectful. "What you played, that was truly beautiful. I judged too quickly. I was wrong." The woman paused. For a moment she did not speak. Then she gave a small, calm smile. "That's okay," she said softly. "It happens." Her simple response surprised him even more than the music had. There was no anger in her voice, no pride, no demand for praise. Just acceptance. He nodded slowly, not knowing what else to say. The words he had spoken earlier in the evening stayed in his mind. He wanted to take them back, but he knew he couldn't. All he could do now was learn from them. As the night continued, more guests tried to speak with her. Some thanked her for the music. Others asked where she had learned to play. She answered politely but briefly, keeping most of her story to herself. She did not come from fame. There was no big reveal, no dramatic announcement, just quiet dedication built over many years and moments. No one had ever seen. The performance had changed the mood of the entire restaurant. The laughter felt warmer. Conversations felt deeper. People spoke more gently, as if they had all been reminded of something important without fully realizing it. The piano now felt alive, as if it had witnessed a truth that the room would never forget. The businessman tried to return to his conversation with friends, but his thoughts kept drifting back to the piano and to the woman. He realized how often in life he had judged people by what he could see on the surface: clothes, job, posture, silence. He had been confident in that habit. Now that confidence felt weak. For the first time, he wondered how many other people he had misjudged. How many stories he had ignored. How many hidden talents he had walked past without ever noticing. Later in the evening, as guests began to leave, many paused near the piano before exiting. Some touched the edge of it gently, as if paying quiet respect to the moment that had unfolded there. A few even asked the staff if she would ever play again. The answer was always the same: no one knew. When the restaurant finally began to settle and the crowd thinned, the woman took a short break near the back. She sat alone for a moment, letting the noise of the evening fade in her ears. Her hands still felt warm from the keys. She did not feel proud in a loud way, but deep inside there was a small, peaceful satisfaction. Not because she had impressed anyone, but because she had shared something real. The businessman watched her from across the room one last time before leaving. He thought about approaching her again, maybe asking more questions, but something held him back. Perhaps it was respect. Perhaps it was the feeling that not every story needs to be fully known. Some moments are meant to stay simple. As he stepped outside into the quiet night, the music still echoed in his mind. He knew the sound would stay with him for a long time. But more than the sound, the lesson would stay, the lesson that true value is often hidden behind the simplest faces, and that the people we overlook may carry the deepest gifts. Inside the restaurant, the woman returned to her work once more. The tables were almost empty now. The lights felt softer. The piano stood silent again. But everything was different. What had happened that evening would not be forgotten. It had planted something in every heart that had been present. And though the night was ending, the quiet change it brought was only just beginning. The night slowly came to an end, and the restaurant grew quiet. Most of the guests had left, their conversations replaced by the soft sounds of the staff clearing tables and putting chairs in order. But even in the quiet, the memory of the piano performance lingered in the air. Every corner seemed touched by the music that had filled the room earlier, leaving a sense of calm, wonder, and respect. The woman returned to her duties, moving quietly among the tables. But now there was a difference in how people looked at her. Even the staff, who had known her for years, seemed to see her in a new light. It wasn't just that she could play the piano. It was how she carried herself, the humility, the patience, and the quiet confidence that made her presence feel calm yet powerful. She had revealed something rare, that true talent does not need loud applause to exist. Word of the evening spread quickly. Guests who had attended couldn't stop talking about what they had witnessed. Some called friends, describing the music and the woman's presence, emphasizing how completely she had captivated everyone. Some even returned in the following days, asking if she would play again. For many, it wasn't just a memory of beautiful music. It was a reminder that appearances could be deceiving, that extraordinary skill often lies hidden behind the simplest faces. The businessman, in particular, felt the impact deeply. He could not stop thinking about how wrong he had been to judge her. The lesson was clear and humbling. Confidence, power, and wealth do not guarantee understanding, and the people we overlook may carry the most profound gifts. He reflected on his own life, realizing how many times he had dismissed people based on superficial impressions, missing opportunities to learn, connect, and be inspired. Over the next days and weeks, the woman's story quietly spread. Some journalists mentioned the evening, intrigued by the narrative of the humble server who had stunned an entire audience with her piano skills. Invitations to perform at small events started to arrive, yet she remained grounded. She did not chase fame or attention. She accepted opportunities that felt right to her, always balancing her work and her passion. The music was never about recognition, it was about sharing a part of herself with the world. One note at a time, for those who had witnessed her play, including the businessmen. The experience became a personal lesson in humility and awareness. They began to notice things they had previously ignored, the quiet gestures of kindness from strangers, the hidden talents in coworkers, the small, unseen efforts that make a difference in the lives of others. The piano performance had become more than just music, it had been a mirror, reflecting the way people often judge too quickly. And this what truly matters. The woman continued to move through her life with the same calm demeanor as always. She remained approachable, kind, and attentive. But there was a new recognition in the eyes of those around her. People no longer dismissed her as just another server. She had earned a quiet respect, one that did not need words or titles. And even though she rarely spoke about her talent, the impact of that evening remained evident in the way people responded to her. The businessman eventually approached her again, this time with genuine warmth and admiration. He no longer made jokes or underestimated her abilities. Instead, he asked about her music, her inspirations, and how long she had been playing. She shared just enough with the same gentle humility, allowing him to understand that her skill had been nurtured quietly over many years. There was no need for grandeur or self-promotion. The truth spoke for itself through her music. In the months that followed, her performances continued to touch hearts. She played at small gatherings, charity events, and even informal meetings, each time leaving people moved and inspired. And while some guests recorded her music or shared her story online, the magic of her talent remained most powerful As the first few notes lingered in the ballroom, the young waitress felt a quiet thrill course through her. The initial tension she had felt melted into focus. She had always played alone, for herself, but now her music had a new purpose. It was speaking to an audience, to people who had no idea of her talent, people who had already underestimated her. Each note she pressed seemed to carry a part of her story, a piece of her heart, and for the first time she realized how powerful it could feel to share it. The room had fallen into a rare silence. The guests, who had been chatting and laughing only moments ago, were now completely absorbed. They had expected a short, awkward attempt, perhaps a few timid notes at best. Instead, they were hearing music that was rich, expressive, and surprisingly complex. Her fingers danced across the keys with precision, yet each note felt alive, full of emotion. It wasn't just skill, it was feeling, and it was impossible to ignore. A wealthy woman, seated near the front, leaned slightly forward, her glass of wine forgotten on the table. Her eyes widened as she tried to follow the melody, clearly amazed. She had expected entertainment from someone trained, someone she assumed belonged in the world of high culture. But here, right in front of her, was a young waitress, someone she had barely noticed all evening, creating a sound that touched the heart. Others around her exchanged glances, silent questions forming on their faces. Who was this? How could someone so unassuming play like that? The older man who had challenged the staff earlier was now completely still. His earlier smirk had disappeared, replaced by a mixture of disbelief and awe. He leaned back, his arms crossed, trying to hide the astonishment that tugged at the corners of his expression. He had been confident, expecting this to be a joke, expecting someone to embarrass themselves. Instead, he was witnessing brilliance, and it unsettled him more than he expected. The piano, once ignored, now dominated the room, commanding attention with each chord she struck. The young waitress's playing grew bolder. She moved from soft, delicate passages to richer, more powerful melodies. She let the music flow naturally, following the rhythm of her heart rather than any strict rules. Each note carried a story, moments of longing, flashes of joy, whispers of hope. The audience felt it, even if they didn't know why. Some closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them. Others sat frozen, unable to look away from her hands as they moved with elegance and confidence. The ballroom had transformed. It was no longer just a fancy event. It had become a stage for raw emotion. A place where wealth and status faded in the face of pure talent. The young woman didn't notice the stares or the growing admiration. She wasn't thinking about recognition or applause. She was lost in the music, completely absorbed in the connection she was forming with the room. Years of practice, moments of doubt, and hidden dreams had all led to this. And now she could see the effect her talent was having. The wealthy guests, so accustomed to power and control, had no choice but to surrender, even if only for a few minutes, to the magic she created. A few guests whispered among themselves. "I didn't think she could do this," one said. Another added, "She's incredible." "I can't believe it." Even the older man quietly admitted under his breath, "I never expected this." The room, once filled with casual chatter and polite laughter, now vibrated with a shared experience. Every person in the audience was connected, not by wealth or status, but by the music and the emotion it carried. The young waitress continued to play, her fingers gliding effortlessly over the keys. She incorporated subtle variations and flourishes, improvising in a way that made the performance feel alive, unpredictable, and deeply personal. Every movement was precise yet full of heart. The guests began to lean in, their expressions softening, their attention rapt. It was impossible to look away or pretend the music wasn't extraordinary. Even those who prided themselves on being critical or skeptical couldn't help but be drawn in. For the first time that evening, she felt a mixture of fear and exhilaration unlike anything she had experienced before. This was no longer private practice. Every note carried weight, every pause demanded attention. And yet, the fear only pushed her to play with even more passion. She realized that her music had power, not just technical skill, but the ability to touch people's hearts, to move them in ways words could not. And as she played, she felt a quiet sense of triumph, not for herself, but for the beauty of sharing something real, something honest, something that had always been waiting to be heard. The final notes of the piece lingered in the air, delicate and pure. There was a pause, a moment of perfect silence, as if the room itself were holding its breath. The audience sat frozen, trying to process what they had just experienced. Then, almost at once, the silence broke into spontaneous applause. The sound was thunderous, echoing off the chandeliers and marble walls. Some guests rose to their feet, clapping with genuine admiration. Others wiped tears from their eyes, unable to hide the emotional impact. The young waitress, slightly trembling, looked up from the piano. For the first time, she saw the full effect of her music. The wealthy audience, once skeptical and dismissive, had been silenced and transformed. She felt a mixture of relief and joy. Relief that she had survived the challenge without faltering, and joy that her secret talent, long hidden, had finally been witnessed. But more than anything, she felt the quiet thrill of recognition, not just for herself, but for the music that had always been a part of her, waiting for a moment like this. And in that moment, she realized something important. Sometimes, the world's most unexpected heroes are hidden in plain sight, waiting for the right moment to shine.